Oh, Fannie, we're finally making it to the Wild Temple podcast. And I'm just really thrilled to be introducing you here, bringing you into our listeners because you, as a householder yogini, a tantric, a deeply devoted mother, and I would say lately, yes, the licensed therapist, I find that what I love and value about you most in our friendship that has been now for years, maybe even reaching decades, I think, is your power of the voice. And so to have you here for people to listen to your voice and how you articulate things, how you bring them from the depths into the surface, and even how you sing, it's just really you're always inspiring to me. So I'm, excuse me. So I'm just so grateful to have you here and just to share this microphone with you. And yeah, so Fannie, I'm going to start just how I often start with introducing people is bringing them into a question where they can introduce themselves. And this is really about dharma. And our podcast is, and our school, the Wild Temple, is largely focused around the practices, the support systems, the passions and purposes that lead us into feeling a life of fulfillment and joy. And so I feel this as dharma, but the greater sense of dharma also connecting us to nature and sacred law. And so you have a unique dharma, svadharma, and I would just love to hear a little bit about your path of purpose, and even how you found yoga and how that led to you to who you are today.
We the omnipotent fermentations of time, taking ancient dreams and technological prime. Weave the stories of the old right through the soul, and so they told and told until they start to transform. They're born again into the next era with the modern flair, but the message still bears one in the many, many in the one. So come on in, cause you're most welcome to the temple of earth, the sun and the moon. Reclaim your power, it's the place we commune, a place for the mind, the body and soul, seated through the ages, become infrangible. Welcome to the Wild Temple. Welcome to the Wild Temple.
Yeah. Thank you, Brooke. I'm so excited to be in conversation with you. It's, in hearing that question, I like immediately go back in time. I like go back to little Fannie or like the home I grew up in. And, the home I grew up in was a lot of things, as all of us experience. But one of the things I think that I'm so grateful for is that I grew up in a home that really invited permission to be who you are. It was a home of artists and creatives, and there was a lot of space to not conform. And my mom was a theater professor and just, welcomed the misfits. And so in that sense, I feel that from a young age, it was like there was possibility, like to expand, right? Like when I think of dharma, right? Becoming who you are, fulfilling purpose, like letting yourself radiate, all the elements that like make up the dynamic personality. And so I feel really grateful even just for theater, for like artists, for the creative household that I grew up in. Yes, there was dysfunction. Yes, there was pain. And there was this welcoming of just being a human, right? Like that full spectrum that creativity and I think artists really encompass. Yeah, and so finding yoga was for me a moment in like kind of the college life. I'd been performing and dancing, and so yoga was kind of like this natural segue as a dancer and an actor, right? All this like your body is the instrument stuff that is, gets a lot to performing artists. And I tried yoga at like my university gym in South Carolina. I'm from Columbia. And so that's where I first got exposed to yoga. And I was like, I'm kind of into this, but it was like the turn of the century, right? It was 1999, 2000, that era. And there wasn't a lot in South Carolina yoga wise then, right? But then within a year or so of graduating college, I moved to Chicago. So in 2001, I was in Chicago living in a big city and was able to really, you know, dip in a lot because in Chicago, there was a lot of cool yoga. I'll pause there. So I didn't really answer the Dharma stuff, but like loop, I mean, I did some, but anyway.
Yeah, I'll add to it and I'll bring you back in.
Yeah.
Awesome. And Lindsay, we can edit this. I'll just like call it out. And
Yeah.
then every now and then, Fanny, too, when you what you might notice with me is as I talk, I have to clear my throat. So I'll hit the mute button. You just ignore that and then I'll cough away. So you're welcome to do the same. All right. So I'd love to just kind of highlight what you shared of your body as the instrument and how this is something as an artist, as a dancer, as a musician, as a yogi, right? We often turn to. And in, I would say, modern culture, we're often asked to ignore the body or kind of pushed away from the body. And even the music and artistry of a soul is often pushed to the background. It's not as important as, the survival needs and the 9 to 5 job, etc. And so part of what I love about your journey and just watching you for over these number of years is this evolution of working with your body and with your voice through the practices of yoga, through becoming a mother, and how this has really just kind of shaped your own unique path, your dharma. So will you speak a little bit into this journey?
Mm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I it's funny because when you go to grad school for psychotherapy, maybe it's just me, but like you kind of start to pathologize everything. You're like, because you're always looking for the problem as opposed to like, wait a minute, things just, I think, different from this like tantric worldview of flowering and becoming. Um, there's this like, what's wrong? And what led to this problem? Uh, and so I lately have had this refrain going of like, how did I become so like body centric? Like what I've been like looking for the problem. Like was I disassociating from my body and was I
Mm.
like did I miss something? And I can't quite track it, right? Because oftentimes healers or therapists will say like, "Oh, I'm doing the work that like I know I needed," or like my research is in that realm that felt like my own healing that I needed. So yes, I obviously like needed to express life through the body. And like I can't quite find where the maybe like missing part is of like me not feeling at home in my body. So I guess I just wanted to like name that and my journey through like this kind of path of performer into yogini into somatic psychotherapist, like to me actually does just feel like one continuum. And you and I think have had some of these conversations in the last year or two, of like still discovering like what the new thing is, and yet I'm like, is there a new thing? Like maybe it is just this sort of um this is the path, right, that has naturally progressed. It feels like performer to tantric practitioner and guide to somatic psychotherapist actually has just been this natural trajectory that has made a lot of sense, like these foundations that have built upon one another. Um, and to speak also to your like, how we're discounting the body or missing the body in so many spaces and places these days, it's really true. And I notice it in my work and working in, like traditional psychotherapy now with individuals and couples, even people that want to, are coming to me because they know they want to work through the body, right? They've heard or read my bio or found me on Psychology Today, even with that inclination. And it's not just them, it's me too. Like sometimes we're still afraid to like use that, right? To like use the body as part of the process.
Mm.
And it is for me this sort of constant, but I do have to like drop down, literally, right? Like drop down and remember that it's okay, right? It's safe. Like we can use our body as part of this process and not just get stuck in the refrain of discussion.
That's so juicy right there. I'd love if you could think of some examples of when it feels unsafe to be in the body, like when we can have that even unconscious habit to how how you could to how you could navigate someone into feeling their body is safe to then grow from there. And, I have particular people in mind right now where there are blocks around sexuality, for example, and then the feeling of if I get into my sexuality, I'm going to unleash the monster. And it's unsafe because then maybe I'll leave my husband or my partner, or I'll just become like this sex addict, or whatever. I have lots of examples that I'm feeling hearing of clients that I'm speaking to currently, and I'm curious, yeah, what are your thoughts around body sanctuary? Making the body, like, are there particular practices that you guide people through, or is it just like a mindset?
Yeah, I think I want to like put body sanctuary over here because that's such a beautiful term. And then this other piece of like, when do I not feel safe in my body?
Mm.
Um, that you first asked. And actually, if someone even knows that, that's awesome, right? Because I think there is this like sometimes it's enough of a disconnect that one might not even be able to name or acknowledge. I don't feel safe in my body for whatever reason, or there is this block. And so, and I know you know this as well, but like, sometimes just acknowledging or meeting the resistance like is the doorway to recognizing there's something else, you know? Um,
Mm.
and so not that I want anyone to feel uncomfortable, right? Or that I'm asking for resistance to be there, but we can't deny that resistance is part of all of our processes, right? And it shows up in so many different ways in our lives. And can we befriend resistance? Like, can we recognize that maybe
Mm.
a lack of safety or recognizing that something is disorganized, dysfunctional, uncomfortable, all of these things is part of the healing too. I think is a big part. And then in terms of then body as sanctuary, or this like body as the instrument, body as the temple, then perhaps like with that awareness, with maybe some felt experience that that's possible, then I could go in to see what the resistance is. Then I could go in to like open that door toward the block and maybe kind of just peek a little bit to it. But I've got some other support, whether it's literal, like leaning against the wall, a therapist, a guide with you, or something you have that is maybe more esoteric, or an experience one might have had through a practice or in nature, or I don't think it happens in isolation
Mm.
to
Mm.
feel body as sanctuary.
Yeah, and I think the key word that I'm catching from you, Fanny, really actually already threaded throughout our whole conversation and even prior to starting this recording was it's support, right? So support as a foundation, support as an anchor. Um, you talked about your own trajectory of dharma, from musician to yogini to somatic therapist. The foundation of each is what has led you through for all of this. And
Mhm.
then, before we hopped on, we were talking a little bit about being a householder and how when you're, when you are being invited into these practices of Tantra, and how they can be so like magnificent and a little bit like earth shattering and a little bit dissolving and all the things, and how yet being a householder is where you can find that anchoring. It's similar to that body temple, finding that sacredness of your own body as an anchor. And how can you get into that with the different tools, leaning up against the wall? I do sitting by a tree, different kinds of ways to get in a way that then you can feel that the body is that sanctuary for then to do that big work.
Mhm.
And I use the analogy, this metaphor lately that's been coming. I'm not sure how to say it in Russian, but it's the Russian nesting dolls, where it feels that, we have this like the big one, which might be, is your community safe? Is your environment safe? Then the second one is your home safe? Or, whichever nesting doll you're focusing on and then the little one, is it you, or reverse it. The big one, is that you? um, yeah, so I'm just curious if you have any other things to add to this, body as this instrument for our dharma, even.
I love the support, bringing in support, and that you're picking up that through line. It's so key. And the first word that came, or thought that came to me as you were first bringing up support, is sleep. I am, 46, and I always, in the last couple decades have prioritized sleep. But now sleep feels like my number one self-care. And we know it, right? Like people, we know, but it's so easy to abandon. And we all notice it when it's off or it's not feeling good. But it's often one of the first questions of the day, that is like one of the small talk questions in a household. And yet, how did you sleep? Right? Like, I care about how you slept, or I want to tell you how I slept. Um, and so to me, that right now is one of the main allies of support and dreams. And when you said the nesting dolls, it made me think of, I've really been fortunate enough the last few years to do this dream ritual course with Chanti Takarote Perez, our dear friend and colleague. And in that we like dream for the year. And my March anchor image, right? My March support from the dream space is, I am supported by my community. Okay. And like that is just came through like divination dreaming that I did back in January. And I have this image that's essentially just dots in a circle that I call on, whether it's like closing my meditation practice or before bed. And when I remember, let's be really honest, to like, I call in that image. I did it just before coming on here. And that's been a huge support for me. And so I do think it's important to remember that our supports change. Okay. And like we need to be open to recognizing when new supports are ready to come in and old supports are outdated,
Hmm.
right? Because we're evolving. And so something we might have, and this is like where coping becomes maladaptive, right? We adapt coping to support us. And then at some point, that coping is no longer helpful, right? It's becoming detrimental for some reason.
Hmm.
So we want to like notice, are my supports still supportive? Whether that's like people, resources, habits, all sorts of things, practices.
Yeah, I just had a funny image. What if we could set the timer on coping? All right, you get like 38 hours and 42 minutes to cope. Like do your whatever it is that you cope, if it's like sugar, whatnot, and then done,
But
right?
it's going to go sour. It's going to have an expiration date. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I love that. Yeah, so you have, again, in our time that we've known each other, speaking to adaptability, and when we have these anchors and we have these support systems and we start to get into the groove, then all of a sudden life is like, boom, face that. See how your capacity stands to this experience. And we're feeling this collectively, like on a very big collective psychic and collective physical level. And so I want to just like rewind though and talk a little bit about as a householder, Fanny, you have these practices that you've utilized that have enabled you to birth twins, for example, and still maintain, run households, still have a beautiful relationship with your husband, still go to work, still practice yoga, and you faced really intense grief with losing family and loved ones. And so these are really challenging events that can often throw you off your game. And so I'd love for you just to speak into this because I know a lot of our listeners
Mm.
have these experiences too in their lives. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, hmm. Yeah, where to begin there?
That's a very big question. We can talk with mother
Yeah,
about motherhood first if you want to
yeah,
start.
but that's, I think, yeah, mother of three. I mean, that's the fire right there. Mother of three, and you said, one household and loving relationship with my husband, all of which I'm grateful for, and none of which are simple, like, so it's real fire for sure. And mirrors. I mean, that's what I constantly feel with those relationships, right? As a parent and as a partner, this the mirror that is constantly being held up. I mean, some of your questions were about like conscious evolution, and the relational field is in some of the prep work you sent me, and that's what I just keep coming back to, like what's being reflected back to me, or what am I willing to see.
Mm,
I tend to, I have moments of being really critical of myself, and especially in the realm of parenting. And I don't think I'm alone there. And it's gotten so much better, but it still shows up. And so even that, right? Like, can I witness my own like inner critic through the relational field and like practice more self-compassion, and find pockets to like reconnect when I'm feeling disconnected.
mm,
Um,
mm,
so yeah, my kids are now, I have two 11-year-olds and a 14-year-old. And we were saying before you pressed record, like I feel actually more rooted in my like householder flow now than I might have even when everyone was really little.
mm,
And that's part just circumstance and where I was developmentally and in my kind of own path. But I feel really like anchored in the home and reprioritizing the home, in part because I can probably see just more how fleeting it all is now that everyone's older. and
mm,
and the parenting that is required is so different, right? It require as kids get older, it's like less, I don't know, physical and mental and more like emotional, right? It really feels like, whew, the relational field and just your presence is
mm,
um is needed in ways even as they start to like spend more time away from home. Yeah, so I'm really grateful for the the spiritual practice, right? Just getting back to like the practices, the spiritual practices that I was lucky enough to be exposed to in my 20s and 30s that prepared me for this moment. Um, you know,
mm,
that's what I can say. That I am so grateful that I was witness to and part of a stream that I'm still part of, right? But I was really like drinking from the waters, in this strong way. And that time when we met, and that all of that has infused this moment, um, to allow me almost to find more spirit and practice in my day to day, in my relationships, in my walks around the neighborhood that aren't as like deeply tied to my cushion.
mm.
If that makes sense.
It does. This is very tantric, remembering how to bring the sacred into the mundane at all times. The mundane is the sacred is the mundane. And it's just like how you began with talking about how we can often pathologize and look to ourselves and see what's wrong versus looking more through this tantric lens of recognizing that the pain and the friction, the small aspects of self or the constriction is what we need to face to access the healing, the breakthrough. And you coined it the fire, right? So in our tradition, we talk a lot about it's definitely a tradition, an ode to the fire, because the fire element is that of waking up, it's destroying the dross, it's illuminating what's needing to become into this next world or next level. And yeah, and relationships are, in my experience too, they bring the fire to the like that's the key. It's, I think, and and we find this in Neo Tantra, that the relationship is the heightened focus. But if we expand that view even in classical Tantra, everything is really about relationship and how we are relating to ourselves, to the world, to another human or animal, is such a beautiful moment for an experience for our conscious evolution or our unconscious de-evolution or involution, however you'd want to say it. But Fanny, I just wanted to share. I had somebody that reached out yesterday, and hopefully she'll be listening. But she was like, "Okay, I have a problem." She's like, "I am a yoga practitioner, 200-hour level, and I have a child. She's 4 now, and I'm suffering from not being able to find time to do my practice." And this is a very common trait that most mothers or parents of any gender or size shape feel. And so I just wanted to bring her in this experience. It makes me smile because then she says, "I guess I just need to do the yoga and let the baby crawl all over me. And I have to be okay with my husband just not really seeing that I'm doing yoga and continuously wanting to talk to me during those times." And I just laughed so hard because that was my experience, and I didn't have a place to go. So I would find the bathroom was like the only place that I could go and do my yoga practice. I'd shut the door, couldn't lock it, not quite allowed with a young one. And or it's it's that's not available at times in our parenting. And even the middle of a house where I was in the foyer, I think is what you called it. And I wound up getting big canvas curtains. And I was like, all right, this is the sign, everyone. If the canvas curtains are shut, this means please do not bother me unless it's an emergency. This is called healthy boundary. And it took them probably 3 years to honor that. But yeah, so I'm curious if you have any other, like, personal Fanny stories around this.
Oh yeah. Yeah, plenty. I wish I could remember. I like made a little reel one time on Instagram because I was meditating in my room. This must not have been that long ago. I'm thinking like maybe during the pandemic 5 years ago or something. So at that time like a 9-year old and 6-year olds or something. And I was meditating and then like just screaming was happening in my household. I mean, I have no idea what, if it was joy or fear or fighting. I mean, probably a little bit of all of it, right? And I just remember dying laughing, right? Like to myself. And then I sang this little ditty. And that's what I'm trying to remember. It was like, I don't even know, something like, "I'm just meditating and the whole world's screaming and burning," or something, like people be screaming and I'm trying to meditate, right? Like it's just it's a perfect example of our lives, right? I mean, there's always that contrast. And so I also have many memories of being on my cushion as a breastfeeding parent and like people coming in and like, and there we are. I'm just like offering milk and letting that happen while I'm also parenting. But going back to like being hard on yourself, I guess like that is such a common refrain from parents. And I remember having it too, because my early motherhood was like some of my deepest commitment to like practice and keeping my sadhana going and like some expectations that were both external and internal because I love to like achieve and follow those rules. Um, that like I was feeling that burden too. So I think also just give yourself a little break. Um, like we can let go of some of the rigidity and savor it when we get some silence. and find the smaller. I'm a huge fan of like the micro moments and like micro practices, but like those weren't being offered to me in that phase of my life, right? It was like, I got to do this like 45-minute ritual. Um, but like what can happen just in the moment upon waking, or what can happen before falling asleep, or what can happen in a 3-minute window, while you're like on the walk with the toddlers. I think those are really important. And I think if we grow up in this culture of practice, right? I don't mean just as children. I mean like in practitioners, in our systems of spirituality where it's like so rigid, we forget that there's room to play, right? And there's room to discover what works for you, right? I mean, it's so important to find, again, we adapt and we change. And I didn't have enough of that flexibility in those early years of motherhood, and some of that served me well because I was really diehard about, staying focused. And it allowed me to break more rules later. But but you could relinquish a little bit too, but yeah, I love it. Yeah, just let the baby crawl on you, right? Legs up the wall, and like someone's lying on you or collapsed on you, and they're the
Yeah.
sandbag.
Yes, totally. They're the sandbag. I love it. My cat's off in the sandbag, even when she has a little claws every now and then. I
Yeah.
have so many, like, you just said so many nuggets. I want to bring some things back where, if I can kind of trace it, the first thing where you shared, there are some gifts that you've received from having a spiritual practice so early on in your raising of a family or being in family. And that for me, I was immediately thinking, wow, I brought my baby in breech birth with a lay midwife in a tub in Asheville, North Carolina with Ujjayi pranayama and ohms. And I don't know what I would have done without Ujjayi pranayama and ohms. And then fast forward to today with just all of the since I started yoga, really, it's been like 25, 27 years or so, a couple deathly, near death experiences, like deathly ill sicknesses to, all these like climate trauma, apocalyptic vibes to so many things, so many things. And I am so grateful for just samavriti breathing to understand the importance of when my breath is choppy as I'm inhaling, notice. When my breath is constricted as I exhale, notice. What can I do about that to change my mindscape? And it will change my physiology so that I can meet the stressors with more vitality and more intelligence. And so, yeah, so I'm just kind of pocketing what you said because yeah, we get these beautiful tools. So my first question to you is, what are some of those tools that you've taken away? And I want to also just say this before I lose this, so you can bookmark that answer. When you talked about how this like highly achieving approach to doing yoga, and we were given 2-hour practices. I even remember this before I found Tantra. I was doing Ashtanga yoga, and it's 2-hour practice, hour and a half primary series. And then, if you can meditate. I never did. I'd always skip Shavasana meditation, which also led me to 4-hour night sleeps and early menopause. And I pushed myself way too hard. And so but that friction and that intensity, what I'm realizing was a heightened level of fire that really didn't serve me to the highest. It did a lot of bodily harm. But I look at my child. I was doing that so that I could be the best parent I could possibly be, so I could unwind the karma, the burdens that I've inherited from my whole matriarchal, patriarchal lineages. And I see my child now as being this like amazing person, like amazing. So if I had to sacrifice, put myself into the fire to raise a good human, that's where I just feel all mothers listening, the work you're doing is so valuable. It's beyond valuable. You're raising our future, and our caretakers for this planet. But this final piece that I want to say to that was these 2-hour, 3-hour practices. So if you do the 2-hour yoga asana, because that's again how we were taught through our tantric lineage, and then you have your minimum hour practice of meditation, which is really like 45 minutes to an hour. That's a 3-hour daily practice as a householder. Like I was splitting it up. And what I realized was we didn't have anyone distilling it for us. You and I have been practicing for decades, and Amy Heater, Stephanie Berea, Nicole Taylor, Sarah Hutchinson, like all these people that we love, Chanti, Dr. Chanti, Tracy Stanley, all of these people from our tradition, we're learning how to distill it to meet the need of the time. And we know that that's that wild misfit tantric, like permission of a tradition that's saying, hey, you don't have to fit in these rules that society has made, like adapt to make it work. And so I create tiny practices, which are 20 minutes, laterals, forward folds, but they're the greatest hits that give you the most Shakti that then you can be like, boom, I'm in it. I have the capacity of the Russian nesting dolls. And this is what I teach in our apprenticeships. Like we don't have to have everything in the kitchen sink. But we do have to know what is the energetic effect of what it is that you're doing. What's the physiological or mental benefit of what it is that you're doing? Weave them together in a way that supports your dharma, and boom, you can do it in a half hour.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. I love also just what you said about moms and kind of unwinding the karmic patterns and raising the next generation. So just want to like snap a little bit to that. Yeah, and distilling, right? That goes back to your first question or kind of the first thread within that larger theme here of like what are the practices and what are some of the tools that that are supportive and and you saying kind of like Samavritti for you, just like getting back to something as simple as that, I think so valuable. Um, I also started thinking about polyvagal work and like Deb Dana's work as you were speaking to that, because, I think we have this like myth about being like calm and collected all the time. And to remember that like, we can have moments of like activation or intensity or whatever, grief, fear, and yet can we like still be in those moments? I think there's another child therapist that talks about swirling in the ventral vagal, right? So like for listeners that aren't aware, like ventral vagal is that aspect of polyvagal theory that's really like when we can like connect, like what allows me to connect to another human, to reach out and ask for help, to say hi and smile, like to stay anchored in as opposed to shut down or like total activation, flee, right? So how do we swirl, like what are the practices, what are my tools that allow me just to swirl in, right? I'm just thinking of like some sweet little like soft serve ice cream or whatever, like a batter that we're just adding a little bit of something magical to. Like, what do I swirl in that allows me to stay anchored in the moment or anchored within myself, even in a moment of grief, or a period of, intense, intensity in our lives when something may be going on in our communities or in our families. It's not that I've got to be okay, but like, what do I have that helps me like delve into the emotional field? And I think that actually has been a new part of my practice as I've moved more toward midlife and, like allowing the feelings that I'm experiencing, right, to be part of my spiritual life, right?
Mm.
As opposed to letting that part of me have to like go away in order to access divinity. Like, no, 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 no. So again, like what allows me, I just keep moving my body here a little bit because I think it's like it is like movement or singing or community or like or my breath. The nature, that I was going to say the ocean, but I live really far away from the ocean right now in Iowa. So then I said the nature.
Mhm.
I think these things that, or my practice, right? Like closing my eyes for 15 minutes and resting and diving a little deeper within, so I can access something beyond me, right? Any of those things have been so integral, and I think that's been a huge part of my householder flow, right? Like that the ways we exist in all aspects of ourselves are part of the fire, part of the process of evolution.
Annie, will you talk a little bit about like the therapeutics, the science, the practicalities of, say, dance and movement to
Hmm.
move the energy that helps? I have a cat trying to crawl up and jump on my lap right now. Um, that helps you honor your feelings, be in your feelings, but not stuck in the feelings.
Mm.
And
Yeah,
and
I don't have
add
a,
here-
go ahead.
let me add here, without destabilizing your nervous system.
Mm.
Because
Hmm.
sometimes we can just like go run, work out, run, and then we're exhausted and we've just like we've kind of put ourselves back in capacity. Yeah, we speak a little to this.
Mm. Yeah, so I think one of the ways to not destabilize the nervous system is to actually meet ourselves where we are, right? So that's not like pushing, that's that like, I'm not going to push away this feeling. I'm going to let this feeling be a part of this moment, right? So if that's choosing to dance, choosing to go for a run, choosing to do a more high intensity activity, um, or choosing to sit by the fire and sing or go into a quiet space alone, right? It's like kind of back to understanding the why, okay, like that you were speaking to with the 20-minute practice. Like I've distilled it. So to me, there's some importance to understanding, okay, why am I choosing this, okay, in this moment? Why is the run the choice? Why is the rest the choice? Why is the dancing? Why is the fire? Like that's some discernment, right? But even more than discernment, or part of the discernment process is meeting ourselves where we are. Right? Can I like meet myself where I am and then be with that, right? Some of that beautiful self-compassion work, or just name it to tame it, like what's really true for me in this moment. And then being able to kind of make a choice that feels aligned with that, that feels right for me in that moment. And sometimes it's not the right choice, right? It's maybe I didn't go in the right direction. Um, I think that's key. And then back to like the science of dance or the therapeutic aspect of that of movement. I don't have that necessarily in my brain. What I do have is um the what do we call it? Like experiential knowledge, right? Or like instead of evidence based, it's experience based. And
Miracle science. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. I mean, we just know for time, for millennia, humans have utilized these tools.
Yeah.
And, I'm a firm believer that if we can dance and sing by a fire, we can do a lot to transform and heal and feel more whole, then maybe we can do sitting, alone doing like Zoom therapy. I mean, I'm not discounting my profession by any means, but like things can get lost, and that's why I think it's so important that we're like bringing the body back into psychotherapy. I love that we're in this like renaissance in a way of somatic noticing. Um,
Hmm.
that but there's so much to be held there, so much to be held through movement. And it feels good. I'll just say too, I've been to like two in the last 6 weeks, maybe just last month. One was like a house party with a DJ, and the other one was a mindful dance class at a studio. And both, after one was like an hour and one I danced for probably 3 hours. But after both, my aches and pains in my hips and my shoulders were gone. Right. So, like lubricating through dance, right? Not through asana, not through stretching, not through my hip workouts, not through lifting weight, whatever. It was like, oh, I just danced
Yeah.
for 45 minutes and my hip pain's gone.
Mm. Mm. Oh, I love that. I love that on so many levels. And it reminds me, I know one aspect of the science is bilateral symmetry. And this is especially if you're, you're working one side and then the other, which we often do. But part of what you just shared, first of all, if we could just all dance by the fire, how much will be transformed. Like, all right, let's seed that, all listeners. Let's start dancing by the fire to make some wildflower-esque seeds of change. That's my new mission. It's like the Wildflower Initiative. We're planting or spreading wildflowers, not wildfires. But so we kind of cultivate that Shakti. But even how you lit up when you were sharing that, Fanny, it's like, well, I think part of it is because our heart is now connected, right? So we're enjoying the music, we're enjoying the relational field, possibly of being around others that maybe we showed up grumpy and just totally fatigued, but the four people around us are like filled with joy. Then all of a sudden it's like, we're like, our Russian nesting doll is now a filled with joy one. Yeah. So, I actually want to talk because we're getting close to our hour. Will you talk a little bit about this relational field? I have brought you up a number of times in our podcast, and it was in our Her Festival, I believe it was last year, 2024, so Fanny is a co-facilitator and leader with all of us at Her Festival, which is an annual gathering that is led by or facilitated by, in a non-vertical but more horizontal leadership way, these tantric teachings and lifestyle practices and joyful practices. And we do this with this just such devotion of year after year showing up with each other, kind of carrying this storyline of, oh, what are you going to teach? Ooh, what are you going to teach? And then we just kind of learn from each other, and then we share. And often our what it is that we teach is like born from that void, that nothingness, that womb of just inspiration. And so you birthed this really beautiful practice, and I'm not sure if you had done it before or not, but I know you were and we were both hesitating, like, what is it we're bringing this time? And it was like to the last minute. And then you're like, ooh, I'm going to do this exercise. And so what I felt from it, and it was, you can share a little bit about it if you want, because you'll be way more eloquent than I will about it. But what I remember being paired up with two other people, and it was kind of, I think, along the lines of creating safe place, like understanding boundaries and using your voice to do so in relationship with these other people. And what I found as the result of this practice, and I wish I could remember what episode it was because I talked about a little more in detail about it, was that it wasn't necessarily my relationship with these individuals that I didn't feel safe in, or I needed to be anyone but myself. I felt like they had so much empathy, like we were feeling each other. But what I felt was actually more needing the healing. And what I tuned completely into was the space between us, the we of this shared experience. And it felt to me, as often I feel with Her Festival, it's like it was this like aha drop of a moment where even in communities, or my community, like I love all the people, we have great conversations, we'll hang out, not so often, but when we do, it was like yesterday. Like it's like no time has passed, we just love each other. But the relational field of in between all of us, there's fragmentation, there's fear, there's sadness. And so I feel like chanting for me is a way that I can help heal this relational field. But I don't have the language, the psychology. I don't know where it came from. Like Fanny, you were the one that like sparked it within me. So I just want to give you the mic and share whatever you want to share about this relational field.
Well, it's everything.
Hmm.
I think that is really, as I sit with it and just kind of breathe into that, it really does feel like everything. And it's so much of what we've been speaking to already today. Um, that which weaves and connects and reverberates between humans, between us and the oceans, between us and the moons and the stars and the cosmos, between us and our practices, between us and all the other people in this world. So we're often feeling like we're alone, right? Happens to me frequently, right? This wound of I'm alone, I'm alone, I'm alone. And it's just a forgetting, right? It's a forgetting, because I mean, loneliness is real. I'm not denying that loneliness is not the thing, but loneliness is different from I'm alone, right?
Mhm.
And so how do we recall, right? Remember, what it is we're connected to, and really even knowing for ourselves what, I think I said this earlier, like what connections are the ones that we want to lean into, right? Like that requires discernment, that requires remembering, that requires kind of sifting through and evaluating in our lives, like, I need to cut some ties and like strengthen some others. So that, I think the relational field is everything because we're connected. The interconnectedness is something we're all right now reclaiming and remembering, right? That's, maybe dormant for some.
Mm.
And I love what you said about the space between,
Mm.
um, and that's something, I think I was first taught by Rod, honestly, and like working one on one with people. And it's like not just you and your client or your student, but there's also this like generative space between. And I think Sarah, our friend Sarah Hutchinson, even like talks about that generative mutuality that happens when we come together, right? That as we start to share our ideas or share our experiences, there's this generative mutuality. And that is often for me, if I can like soften back enough, not work so hard, not be in like, fear stories or insecurity stories, whatever they are, if I can soften back and sense into relational field or sense into the space between, whether I'm with someone in this close proximity or it's a distance, I can feel it, right? And I'm sure your listeners know this, right? Because they've, had these experiences, right? We can feel into that. And we can also feel into when the relational field um, feels disjointed, right? And you're speaking to right now, there's lots of fragmentation. But we could even kind of bring it more micro, like, that feeling like, I had an argument, or like that conversation didn't quite go well. And something for me, I feel it in my body, right? Like I know, something either is like gone against my values, gone against my like ethos, something's like, I'm feeling some ick. Um, and then I can bring some curiosity into like, okay, does this healing happen? Is the repair within myself, right? Because sometimes it's just a repair for ourselves, or is a repair need to be made with another human? Does a repair or offering need to be made in some larger way in my community, in my natural landscape, making an offering, a ritual, right? There are lots of ways I think that repair can unfold. But I do think that's part of this reweaving of the relational field, is recognizing that it's never too late to repair. Okay, never too late. As a parent, back to like the parenting conversation we've been having, never too late. Um, and it's
Mm.
always available to us. But, and again, it might just be with ourselves. Yeah, so I think that's what's arising right now as we discuss relational field. It's a big topic.
Yeah. And thank you for that kind of web. When you first talked about it's everything, to me, I was like, oh, is it the divine? And then, right? But then I was like, well, it's the divine, or it's an aspect of the divine. And then I was thinking, like, I see often words, I guess I have some kind of synesthesia, right? I'll see the pictures of the feeling tones of what someone's saying. And what I immediately saw was the web, and this like beautiful web and actually before then I was thinking about the extracellular matrix, as that like kind of fluid space between, and how if our inner world is just a microcosm to the outer world and this beautiful mirroring of, then of course there's this extracellular matrix in this material world as we know it. And so to dance in it, to gather around the fire in it, to sing into it, to repair it, right, is just where I feel it's 11:11, where I feel the work that we can be doing individually for the collective is actually something that we can actually do. Right? We can't change someone else's mind. We can't control the what's going on in politics, but we can affect not only our individual self, but I think now, thinking these Russian nesting dolls, I think also, and this relational field. We can do our part to chant mantra into the field, or to sing or dance, or say, I'm sorry, I love you, I forgive you, I forgive me. Yeah, beautiful, Fannie. So we're running up on time, and I want to honor our time. So I love to just close with two questions. And the first is, what are you reading right now? And then the second is, as the wise woman you are now, and you can take that however you want to take that. I will say I believe you're a wise woman. You're nearing elder too. So for all of you listening, hopefully you get to meet Fannie sometime in your lifetime in the flesh. What is it that you would have loved to, or what would you like to say, or what would you have loved to have shared to your younger version of yourself that may still, be wounded or broken on some level? What kind of guidance?
Hmm. I'm in between books. Fiction has been a big part of my self-care ever since I went back to grad school for psychotherapy. And I'm loving fiction in my life right now. But the book I just finished was awesome. As I've read two books by Richard Powers. He's who wrote The Overstory, which is this wonderful book about trees. If you haven't read it, I mean, it's about many other things, but it really shifts your awareness of trees. And then his newer book is called The Playground. And what I love, and this, what I love about those two books, maybe his other writing is like this too, but like some aspect of our earth is a key character, right? So it just really, it's like they're tantric, right? It's like animist in fiction, in some ways. And so the playground, it's the ocean. And I know you're on your way to Hawaii soon. And I had my first trip last year, and the Pacific Ocean is this key character in the playground. And whew, I've had so many dreams in the last month that just like are incorporating the ocean and this like magical, like where land meets sea, and the Pacific Ocean is magical. So that's what I just read. And what would I say to my younger self? Hmm. As you were asking that question, there's this tenderness that arises. But then I realize it comes back to something I've already said, right? I would let her know you're not alone. Like giving that information, that support a little sooner, because that was a feeling I had a lot. Yeah, you're not alone.
Hmm. Feel that in our relational field. Thank you, Fannie, for speaking to her, she, and you. And there's the power of the voice, right? Power of the word is so strong for healing.
Yeah, yeah, it really is. Mhm.
Yeah, thank you so much for being on the show. And I hope to have you back. And I know we have more that we can talk about, especially around grief. And again, the householder practitioner, and this juxtaposition, Vesica Pisces, of yoga and psychotherapy. It's really rich with information there. So anyway, I love you so much, Fannie. Thanks for showing up.
Mm, I love you too. I love you too, Brooke. What an honor. Yeah, swaha. Mm, what an honor.